That morning, Denver was so cold the air itself turned to mist. Elena Monroe stood in her small kitchen, stirring eggs slowly in a pan. The scent of butter and coffee mingled together the promise of a peaceful morning. Until Connor's phone lit up on the marble counter, buzzing softly. A message. She hadn't meant to look. She wasn't the curious type. But the words flashed right across the screen. "Can't wait until tonight. Your place." And below it, a picture. The spoon slipped from her hand and clattered loudly on the tile. Her fingers trembled. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest. 12 weeks pregnant. The man she trusted, the man who once promised to start a family together, had been performing a role all along, until someone newer came along. Connor walked out of the bathroom, hair damp, towel around his waist. His eyes darted from the phone to her. No guilt, only mild annoyance. "You shouldn't be reading my messages. And you shouldn't be lying." His reply was colder than the air outside. "I'm not even sure that baby is mine." Elena froze. The words "that baby" from his mouth felt sharper than the snow falling outside. She left the apartment in a thin sweater and jeans, taking nothing but her wallet, phone, and car keys. The city was white, the wind cutting her face like glass. Her car sped down the highway, headlights slicing through fog, snowflakes thickening by the minute. She didn't know where she was going, only that staying would break her completely. Denver faded behind her, giving way to forests and snow-covered mountains. The radio hummed through the wind a Billie Holiday song, rough and aching. Elena let out a dry, broken laugh. Maybe I really have nowhere left to go. A storm descended. Snow blurred the world, swallowed the road. Her headlights dimmed under a film of ice. Wipers thrashed helplessly. Then a shadow crossed the road. She yanked the wheel on instinct. The tires skidded over black ice. The car spun, screeching metal, flashing lights, her heart hammering, then a violent crash. Glass shattering. Metal twisting. Air sucked from her lungs. Then silence. When she opened her eyes, the world tilted sideways. The smell of smoke, fuel blood. Her hand brushed her forehead, wet. Blood. "No, my baby." She fumbled for the seatbelt, fingers shaking so hard she missed twice before it clicked free. The door was jammed. She kicked it open with all her strength. The cold slammed into her like knives. Snow soaked through her clothes, biting into her skin. Elena stumbled toward the road. No headlights, no sound, only endless white. Each breath came out as mist, dissolving into nothing. "Help!" She tried to cry, but her voice was swallowed by the wind. Her vision spun. She fell to her knees in the snow, both hands on her belly. "Please, just let my baby live." Then everything went black. A distant sound. An engine. Light broke through the storm. A black SUV screeched to a stop on the road. A deep, commanding voice. "Someone's out there. Boss, I see her." Heavy boots crunched the snow. A man knelt beside her. The beam from a flashlight cut across his face, high cheekbones, dark eyes, a thin scar running from chin to throat. He pressed 2 fingers to her wrist. Still breathing, weak but alive. "Can you hear me?" His voice rough, low, and steady. Elena's lips moved. "The baby, my baby." His brows furrowed. "How many weeks?" 12. He nodded once. "Get her in the car, now." The driver hesitated. "Boss, the nearest hospital's 40 miles out. The storm's closing the roads." Lorenzo Whitmore's gaze cut through the snow sharp, unyielding. "No hospital. To the estate. Call my private doctor." When Elena woke, the world was no longer white, but bathed in the soft glow of a golden lamp. High ceiling, wooden walls, the faint scent of antiseptic mixed with cedar. An older man in a white coat stood beside her bed, checking the monitors. "Good evening, Miss Monroe. You suffered a mild concussion and hypothermia, but the baby is safe." She blinked, dazed. Where am I? The Whitmore estate, on the edge of the Colorado Range. That name Whitmore echoed in her mind like a whisper from another world. The door opened. The man from last night stepped in, black shirt still dusted with snow. His eyes swept over her, calm, unreadable. "You're awake." Elena tried to speak, but her throat was dry. He poured a glass of water, handed it to her. The gesture was small, precise, controlled, almost frighteningly composed. "Thank you for saving me," he answered flatly. "I just don't like leaving people to die on the road." A cold statement, but the way he looked at her as he said it carried something else. Something even he seemed unwilling to name. Night fell. Wind whispered through the pines. Elena lay awake, listening to footsteps pacing the hallway. The room was too elegant, too quiet, and yet she couldn't shake the sense that the walls were listening. She started to rise when she heard voices outside the door. "She's awake, sir. Who is she?" "Someone who shouldn't be here, but came just when I needed a reminder." Elena froze. A reminder of what? And why had his gaze, before he left, carried something that looked like regret? Her heart pounded. This house felt less like a refuge and more like a lair warm. Yes, but belonging to something dangerous enough to swallow her whole. What she didn't know was that, at that same moment, Lorenzo Whitmore stood before his office window, watching snow fall under the yellow lights, whispering. She has the same eyes as Elena, from all those years ago. Sometimes fate doesn't begin with a hand reaching out, but with someone willing to lift you from the snow. If you believe love can bloom even in the coldest places, come with me to part 2, when she woke up in another world. Elena awoke to the scent of antiseptic mingled with sandalwood, faint, sharp, and hauntingly familiar, like a memory passing by. Light filtered through tall misted windows, painting the white sheets in sterile brightness too clean, too emotionless. It took her a few seconds to remember where she was. The room wasn't a hospital, nor a motel. Everything was too quiet, too still, too foreign. A calm, professional voice spoke. "Don't try to sit up yet. You had a mild concussion, but the baby is fine." Elena turned her head toward the man beside the bed. Silver hair, white coat, and an old Longines watch glinting beneath his cuff. "You're a doctor." "Fontaine," he said gently. "Private physician of the Whitmore family." The Whitmore family. The name pulled her back to last night, to the man in the storm, the one with a faint scar cutting down his jaw, eyes dark as a brewing tempest. She tried to sit, but dizziness spun her vision. Fontaine steadied her with a careful hand. "Easy, Miss Monroe. You were brought here around midnight. Had we gone to a hospital, you might not have survived the hypothermia." Elena nodded weakly. Her voice rasped. "The man who brought me here, was it your employer?" The doctor's smile was faint, unreadable. "He'll be here soon." 10 minutes later, a knock slow, measured. No one answered before the door opened. The man appeared against the pale morning light. Lorenzo Whitmore. White shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearms, no tie. His features seemed carved from cold iron, precise, restrained, and weary in a way that made his composure look fragile. His gaze drifted briefly over her face, then to the hand she had resting protectively on her belly. "The child is safe." His voice was deep, roughened, but without the tone of tenderness the words should have carried. She nodded. "The doctor said we're fine. Thank you for saving me." Lorenzo stood still for a beat. "Don't thank me. I just don't like seeing people die on the road." He said it flatly, but in his eyes flickered something like regret, as though he'd once seen another body lying in the snow. Long ago, when it had been too late to help. Turning to Fontaine, he ordered, "Monitor her blood pressure every 4 hours, no risks." Then back to her. "You can stay here a few days. Once you're strong enough, I'll have someone drive you back to Denver." Elena pressed her lips together. Denver? 2 syllables heavy as an open wound. She had no home, no place to return to, but she didn't say it. After Lorenzo left, she was allowed to shower. Warm water washed away the blood and gasoline, but not the fear lodged deep in her chest. In the wardrobe, she found a silk nightgown, soft, perfectly her size. No one had asked for her measurements, yet somehow, the people here seemed to know her better than she knew herself. At noon, she was invited to dine in a glass room overlooking the snow garden. The world outside was still a painting of white and gray. The only sound was the ticking of an old clock and the faint curl of smoke rising from a distant chimney. When Lorenzo entered, she startled slightly. He didn't need to announce himself. His presence changed the air. "Eat," he said simply. "The doctor said you need nutrition." "Do you always command people that way?" Elena's tone was mild, yet enough to make him pause. He raised an eyebrow. "Habit. My work requires people to follow orders, not argue." "Then I suppose I wouldn't make a very good employee." Something flickered behind his eyes, surprise, laced with a trace of amusement. "No," he said quietly. "You'd make a good challenger. and there aren't many left around here. Silence settled. Outside, snow began to fall again. Elena asked softly, "Where are we? Exactly, I remember only the white road and your headlights." "The Whitmore estate, north of the Rockies, about 70 miles from Denver." "That far? It's safer here." He hesitated, his voice lower. "At least for now." By dusk, the mansion was washed in a pale golden hue. Elena leaned against the balcony rail, watching snow melt along the steps. From afar, she saw Lorenzo speaking with a bearded man in a black coat, a gun holstered at his side. They exchanged a few quiet words before the man turned and disappeared into the forest. Silent as a wolf in snow. Her stomach tightened. Safe, he'd said. But surrounded by men with weapons, the word felt meaningless. Behind her, a woman's voice spoke. "You're awake." Elena turned. A woman in her 30s stood at the doorway, sleek black hair in a bun, posture elegant, eyes sharp as glass. "I'm Lucia Whitmore Lorenzo's sister." Lucia approached, carrying a tray of tea. "My brother said you were in an accident. I saw the wreck. You could call it a miracle you're alive." "Maybe," Elena murmured with a weak smile. Lucia sat down, her expression softening slightly. "He doesn't bring strangers here, hasn't for a very long time." "Why not?" Lucia didn't answer immediately. She turned the teacup in her hands, the scent of bergamot drifting through the room. "Because the last time he did, that person didn't survive." The words cut like ice. Elena stared, lips parted but soundless. Lucia gave a faint smile. "Don't worry, my brother doesn't hurt women, especially not pregnant ones." A breeze slipped through the door, tousling Lucia's hair. For an instant, sunlight glinted off the silver ring on her hand, engraved with 3 letters, E. Elena froze. What do those letters mean? Lucia glanced down, her smile small, almost sad. A name. Someone my brother buried with his past. That night, Lorenzo appeared again unannounced. 2 gentle knocks, then the door opened. "Fontaine says your vitals are stable. You'll need 2 more days of rest." Elena lowered the book in her lap. "Do you always check on your patients yourself? Only the ones who tend to walk out into blizzards? You're afraid I'll run away." "No." He stepped closer, stopping a few feet away. "I'm afraid you'll die again." His voice wasn't loud, but carried something unspoken, half command, half plea. Elena's breath hitched. "I don't know who you are, but I have a feeling this place isn't just a house." "You're right," he said, without hesitation. "It's a fortress, and sometimes my home needs walls thick enough to keep what's outside from getting in, and to keep what's inside from getting out." Her question drew a faint smile from him, one that never reached his eyes. "You're sharper than I expected, Elena Monroe." Her name, in his mouth, sounded almost like a spell. Elena felt her chest tighten, a strange mix of unease and fascination. He turned to leave, but paused at the door, his voice barely above a whisper. "The day I found you, the snow was red with blood. I've seen that scene before 8 years ago. Only then, I was too late." The door clicked shut, leaving her alone in silence. She placed a trembling hand on her belly, feeling her heartbeat race. Outside, the snow kept falling quiet, relentless. And within these walls, she sensed something stirring, as if she had stepped into a story that hadn't yet ended. A story of a man still haunted by his ghosts, and a woman carrying new life into a place once steeped in blood and sin. This time, it seemed, the past had begun to breathe again. Mornings at the Whitmore estate were unlike any Elena had ever known. No car horns, no neighbors slamming doors, no scent of baked bread wafting from next door. Only the wind cold, restless, sliding against the thick glass windows, carrying the damp breath of pine and snow. She opened her eyes as light slipped through the heavy beige curtains. Everything was quiet, so quiet it was almost terrifying. Somewhere beyond the hallway, she could hear the steady, rhythmic tick of a pendulum clock, like the heartbeat of this house. Elena wrapped herself in a thin cardigan and descended the grand staircase. The manor, in daylight, was beautiful in a way that felt frozen gray stone walls, ebony floors polished to mirror sheen, old paintings framed in tarnished gold. She passed a few strangers' men in black suits, shoes soft as whispers, eyes straight ahead. They nodded courteously but with an air of watchfulness. The feeling was unmistakable. She was a guest in a house where no one had invited her, and no one dared to ask her to leave. The breakfast room overlooked the snowy garden. Morning sunlight gleamed across the white porcelain set, over steaming tea and over Lorenzo Whitmore. He sat at the head of the table, black shirt, silver watch glinting faintly on his wrist. No one spoke, only the quiet scrape of silverware against plates. When he saw her, he looked up. "You're awake. Fontaine says your vitals have improved." "I'm fine." She sat carefully across from him. "It just feels like there's nothing here but silence." Lorenzo's lips curved slightly. "Silence is a luxury, Miss Monroe. I pay dearly to keep it." "What kind of price?" "Usually blood, sometimes memory." He said it as casually as if commenting on the weather, leaving her unsure how to respond. In the soft gold light, the scar under his chin faded, revealing a face that was both severe and captivating in all sharp edges and quiet shadows. Elena sipped her tea, forcing a steady tone. "You tend to speak in half answers, Mr. Whitmore." "And you," he replied evenly, "tend to ask questions better left alone." A silence stretched between them, taut but strangely intimate. Only when Lucia entered did the air ease. "Brother, I need your signature on the shipment papers for New York." Elena glanced at her. "What kind of business do you run?" Lucia smiled politely. "Imports wine, leather, collectible art, rare items. My brother prefers discretion, not publicity." When Lucia left, Lorenzo set his fork down. "Don't believe everything my sister says. Some truths aren't meant to be translated into English." At noon, Elena was allowed to walk the garden behind the manor. The land stretched into a misty forest of pines, each tree wrapped in fog. High above, cameras hid discreetly among the eaves. Everything here was guarded even freedom. Her fingers brushed the iron railing, freezing cold. Why would a man like him live this way, surrounded by walls, weapons, and silence? A man so polished, so controlled, yet confined by his own fortress. A voice behind her made her start. Planning an escape. She turned. Franco, the steel-faced bodyguard. "No, just trying to breathe." Breathing's allowed, but only within the perimeter. His tone was calm, his eyes unmoving. "The boss doesn't like surprises." "Your boss likes control, then?" Franco's mouth quirked. "He only controls what he's afraid to lose." That afternoon, Lucia brought Elena a file. "My brother said you used to work as a translator." Elena nodded, flipping through pages dense with Italian text. "What is this?" "Trade agreements. They need an English version for our partners. Just work, nothing more." Elena didn't question it. She carried the papers back to her room, opened her laptop. But as she read closer, certain phrases stood out: special cargo, priority transport route, anonymous receiver. She stopped. Pieces began to fit together in her mind. Guards, guns, electric fences, vague ledgers. When Lorenzo knocked that evening, she wasn't surprised. He glanced at the screen, then at her. "You think I'm hiding something?" She took a breath. "I just don't understand why you'd have me translate a document that won't say what it's really about." "Because I need someone intelligent," he said, stepping closer, "not someone curious." His voice dropped lower. "What do you think it is? Weapons, drugs?" Elena met his gaze. "I think you're hiding something more complicated than that." For a moment, exhaustion, not anger, flickered in his eyes. "There are things," he said quietly, "that are safer not to know." "And saving me, bringing me here, is that one of those things?" He didn't answer. She saw it then, the conflict inside him, the pull between protecting and fearing the consequences of his own compassion. At last, Lorenzo spoke, voice soft. "You can leave any time. I'll take you wherever you want. But don't stay here just to question me." "What if I want to stay?" "Then learn to believe that not everything guarded is evil." He turned away, leaving her in the hush of his fading footsteps. That night, snow fell again. Elena couldn't sleep. She opened the window, the cold air biting her skin. In the far corner of the garden, a faint light flickered from a small cabin. A lone figure stood beneath it, smoke curling from his hand. "Lorenzo?" She watched him quietly. Under the dim glow, the smoke drifted upward, merging with his breath. He stood perfectly still, a silhouette carved from solitude. It wasn't grief she sensed in him, but something heavier, the kind of loneliness that comes from too many years surviving. Something twisted in her chest. There was something about this man that drew her and frightened her in equal measure. When he turned his head, their eyes met, separated by distance and darkness. No smile, no words. Just a single, fleeting moment, enough for her to understand that behind all the walls, They were both searching for the same thing, a reason to believe the world could still be redeemed. The next morning, Lucia entered her room carrying a small wooden box. "My brother sent this. He said you might need it." Elena lifted the lid. Inside, a gold-plated pen and a single handwritten note, his slanted script neat and deliberate. "When you translate what I send you, remember what matters most isn't always in the words, but in the silence between them. L.U." Elena sat still, her fingertips tracing the ink. The silence between them. What did it mean? A warning or an invitation? Outside, the snow was beginning to melt. Sunlight crept over the mountain ridge. Inside the fortress, a man kept his world alive through control. And upstairs, a woman began to wonder if breaking the rules might lead her to freedom, or only to a trap disguised as kindness. Elena smiled faintly, a mix of fear and defiance. Because some walls don't need doors to imprison anyone. Sometimes, the heart itself is the most beautiful cage of all. Snow fell again. Morning at the Whitmore estate was drowned in white, thick, heavy, almost like mist that refused to fade. Elena sat at the desk by the window, the warm light from the lamp spilling over the papers scattered across the surface contracts, translations, and her blue ink notes in the margins. The Italian words danced before her eyes: merce speciale, porto discreto, pagamento anticipato. Special cargo, discreet port, payment in advance. Her gaze lingered on one line, marked in red distribuzione garantita sotto il nome Whitmore Industries. Guaranteed distribution under the name Whitmore. She stared at that name for a long time. A legitimate face for something that wasn't. Just like Lorenzo Whitmore himself, perfect, refined, and cloaked in a fog no one could see through. Lucia knocked lightly before entering. "My brother asked if you've finished this morning's translation." Elena folded the papers. "Almost, but I wanted to ask, what does special cargo actually mean?" Lucia paused in the middle of the room, her expression calm but edged. "Usually, items hard to price antiques, paintings, rare wines. Why do you ask?" "Because in this contract, that special cargo is shipped under a private code bypassing customs." Lucia's smile barely moved. "You're observant, but not everything that takes a detour is illegal. Elena, some clients simply prefer privacy from the press, and your brother helps them stay hidden." Lucia tilted her head, the smile faded. "You're talking about my family's business like a judge, while living under our roof, at our mercy." Elena said nothing. The words were true, and still, they stung. When Lucia left, the door closed with a soft but decisive sound, like a warning. There are places you're not meant to look. By late afternoon, the snow grew thicker, blanketing the railings so deeply that even the birds wouldn't land. Elena left her desk, wrapped herself in a wool coat, and walked into the back garden. The air bit at her skin sharp, metallic, but she needed to breathe, needed to escape the sense that someone, somewhere, was always watching. And she knew it was true. There were cameras on every corner. She wandered toward the greenhouse, the only place still alive with color. Inside, red roses bloomed defiantly against the frost, glowing like small fires trapped in glass. Elena bent down, brushing a petal, cold as metal. A voice behind her. "Those flowers can't survive without heat. Here, everything beautiful has a price." She turned. Lorenzo stood there, black coat dusted with snow, hands in his pockets. Light from the glass roof cut across his face, softening the scar on his chin but sharpening his gaze that dark, unsettling calm. "Elena?" He said her name for the first time without distance. "You've been reading too closely into the documents. You check what I do. I don't need to. You leave traces. So you admit those contracts aren't legal. Admitting or denying won't change anything." He stepped closer, voice lowering. "Here, what matters isn't right or wrong, it's who defines them." Her fingers tightened. Fear and anger burned through her. "You talk like someone who believes laws don't apply to him." "No," he said, meeting her eyes sharp as a blade. "I talk like someone who knows laws are what the weak cling to." Elena took half a step back. "You saved me just to make me part of this world of yours?" "No." He closed his eyes briefly. "I saved you because I couldn't bear seeing blood on the snow again." She froze. "You've seen it before." He didn't answer. He just turned toward the forest, the wind stirring his coat. 8 years ago, he said quietly. "It was a woman. I was too late." That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She opened her laptop, trying to connect to the internet, but access was locked. Only the estate's internal network was active. In a nameless folder, she found a few encrypted files. She wasn't an expert, but even she could tell these weren't translation materials. When she tried to open one, a message appeared. Unauthorized access will be recorded. Her pulse spiked. She closed it quickly. And just then the door opened. Lorenzo. He stood in the doorway, the light from the hall cutting his face in two, one side bright, one in shadow. "What are you looking for?" She froze, just checking email. "That computer isn't connected to the internet. You know that." His tone was low, calm, but every word landed heavy. "You're walking yourself into trouble, Elena. For wanting to know who's really protecting me?" Their eyes locked. Lorenzo exhaled, sitting on the edge of the desk. "What do you think I am? A gun runner, a smuggler, a devil in a tailored suit?" Elena didn't answer. He gave a wry smile. "Maybe all three. But at least I don't pretend to be good. And I'm supposed to trust you for being honest." "No, you should trust me because I haven't hurt you." She went still. He was right. Since that night in the storm, everything he'd done had kept her safe. And yet that safety felt like a velvet cage. "I'm leaving tomorrow," she said suddenly. Lorenzo looked at her for a long moment, unreadable. Then he nodded. "If that's what you want, I'll have someone drive you. But before you go." He leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. "Ask yourself who out there will believe you when even you don't know what you've seen." He stood, turned, and walked away. The door shut softly, leaving behind the faint scent of smoke, warm and dangerous, just like him. The next morning, Lucia came in. "My brother said you're leaving. I'll arrange a car and your papers." Elena nodded. "I don't want to cause trouble for your family." Lucia smiled faintly, coolly. Trouble doesn't come from those who leave. It comes from those who can't let go. The words stayed with her all day. By evening, she packed a small bag, a few books, a coat, the unfinished translation. As she stepped into the hall, she heard voices below. Franco's urgent. The shipment was stopped at the checkpoint. Someone tipped them off. Lorenzo's reply, cold as glass. "Clean it up, no traces." Elena froze on the stairs. "No traces." 3 words that could mean anything, and all of it terrifying. That night, the snow stopped. Elena finished packing, ready to slip out before dawn. But when she opened her door, she froze. Lorenzo was standing in the hallway, no coat, just a white shirt, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "You really thought you could leave without saying goodbye?" His voice wasn't angry, just tired. Elena tightened her grip on the bag. "You said I was free to go, and I keep my word, but at least let me walk you to the gate." She said nothing. They walked together down the grand staircase. Light from the chandelier cast long shadows across the marble floor, like reflections of ghosts. At the door, the wind hit them sharp, freezing. Lorenzo set the glass down on the step and looked at her. "You know, Elena, some people come into our lives not to stay, but to remind us we once had a chance to do the right thing." She opened her mouth to answer, but then a gunshot shattered the silence. Short, precise, from the forest. Franco burst from the dark. "Boss, they've found us." Lorenzo turned instantly, pulling Elena behind him, his body shielding hers. "Inside, now." Her heart pounded. Shadows moved in the snow, flashes of gunfire lighting the night. Franco fired back, metal echoes ringing through the cold. Elena looked up, met Lorenzo's eyes, steady and unshaken amid the chaos. "Now you understand," he said quietly, "why I never wanted you to see my world." The snow turned red. And in that moment, Elena realized the line between savior and destroyer was thinner than breath in the winter air. Gunfire shattered the silence of the snowy night like funeral drums. No one spoke. Only the wind howled through the cracks, carrying with it the scent of burning pine and gunpowder. Lorenzo pulled Elena tightly against his chest, his hand pressing the back of her head with such force she could barely breathe. "Don't look, don't speak." His voice was rough, not commanding, but pleading. Outside, Franco shouted something in Italian. Then the roar of engines filled the air. Headlights cut through the storm like blades of light across snow. Lorenzo pushed her down a narrow hallway behind a wooden wall, sliding a steel panel shut. In the darkness, Elena heard the lock click, then the low, distant hum of helicopter blades growing louder by the second. "What's happening?" she whispered. "They found the estate." "Who?" "The people I betrayed." His voice was low, steady, his eyes fixed on the narrow viewing slit. "And now they want their debt repaid in blood." The underground bunker beneath the Whitmore estate stretched deep below the earth, its walls built thick as a ship's hull. Dim lights flickered. The air smelled of metal and smoke. Rows of steel cabinets and control panels lined the concrete hall. Lorenzo switched on a flashlight, tugging her by the wrist. "They'll come from the south side. Franco's holding the gate. We need to move down." "Down where?" "The armory." She stopped short. "You're going to kill them?" He looked at her calmly, too calmly. "No, I'm going to survive." He led her to a small room at the far end of the corridor. Inside were several locked steel cases and a wooden wall lined with narrow slots, no mirrors, no paintings. He pressed a switch hidden behind a cabinet. The wall slid open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. Elena shivered. "What is this?" "The safest place in this house," he said quietly, "and the most dangerous." They descended the cold stone steps. Above them, the gunfire grew closer, mingled with shattering glass and muffled screams. Elena tried to cover her ears, but his hand never let go of hers. At the bottom, Lorenzo switched on another light. Rows of steel shelves filled the room crates, folders, old wooden boxes, and several metal containers marked with faded military insignia. Elena stepped back, her voice trembling. "What is all this, Lorenzo?" "The past," he said softly. "The part I tried to bury even from myself." He opened a case, revealing a pistol, checked the magazine. "Stay here. Don't open this door for anyone but me." "Where are you going?" "Upstairs. I need to hold them off so you can live." She grabbed his hand. "You'll die." "No." He looked at her eyes steady, filled with a strange, aching gentleness. "I'm not allowed to die while you're still here." He pulled a silver necklace from his pocket and placed it in her palm. 2 engraved letters gleamed faintly. It was my mother's. "Keep it. Think of it as a promise." She wanted to ask more, but he was already gone, his footsteps echoing through the corridor until there was only silence. Elena sank against the wall, listening to the distant thunder of gunfire. Time stretched until every second felt like forever. Each explosion above struck her chest like a heartbeat gone wrong. She held her belly, feeling the faint, fragile rhythm of life inside a candle flickering against a storm. And in that moment, she understood. If he didn't come back, she wouldn't leave this place. Not out of fear, but because nothing out there would mean anything without him. Up above, Lorenzo moved through smoke and debris. The hallways were burning the scent of blood thick in the air. Franco, bleeding from his shoulder, still held the line with grim resolve. "Boss, they've got someone inside already." "I know. There are twice as many of them. Snipers on the ridge." "It doesn't matter," Lorenzo said quietly, loading his rifle. "We just need to hold until dawn." He took the AR-15 from the table, loaded the magazine, and raised his head. The cold wind swept through the shattered windows, snow swirling in, but his eyes didn't waver. In the bunker below, a sound came from the steel door. "Lorenzo," she called. No reply. A heavy knock followed, then a deep male voice, unfamiliar. "Miss Elena, we're from the government. Open the door." Her breath caught. "He sent us to get you out." Her fingers hovered over the switch, but his voice echoed in her head. "Don't open for anyone but me." The tone outside changed harsher now. "Open it, or you'll die down there with him." A blast shook the walls. The door rattled violently. She fell, metal dust raining from the hinges. "Stop!" she screamed. "I'm pregnant." But the pounding continued. She looked around wildly, and then she saw it. The narrow gap in the wooden wall. The secret passage he'd shown her. Without thinking, she crawled inside and pulled it shut. Moments later, the main door burst open, flashlights slicing the dark. A different voice spoke, cold and precise, in Italian. "She's not here. He must have moved her. Let's go." Footsteps faded. Silence returned. Elena crawled out, trembling. The bunker was wrecked smoke, broken steel, the sharp tang of blood. "Lorenzo," she whispered hoarsely. She stumbled up the stairs. Each step was slick with blood and ash. Upstairs, the lights flickered. Franco lay near the doorway, still holding his gun. Elena knelt beside him, tears blurring her vision. "Franco, where's Lorenzo?" He opened his eyes weakly, lips pale. "North, Greenhouse. She ran. Through the snow, through the ruins of the garden until she saw it. The greenhouse was destroyed, iron beams twisted like ribs. Red roses lay scattered across white snow like spilled blood. In the center stood Lorenzo alone. Gun in hand, blood soaking his shoulder, breath ragged but eyes sharp as ever. 3 men in black coats faced him. One stepped forward, voice mocking. "So, Whitmore, finally on your knees." Lorenzo gave a faint smile. "I've never knelt. I only bow when I bury someone I love." He fired. The flash split the dark thunder, smoke, chaos. 2 men fell, the third lunged, knife in hand. Lorenzo aimed again, click, empty. He blocked the blade with his arm, the knife cutting deep. Elena screamed, grabbed the gun lying nearby. Her hands shook violently, but one thought blazed clear. If he dies, the child will grow up never knowing who saved them. She pulled the trigger. The bullet struck the man's chest. He fell without a sound. Elena dropped the gun and ran to Lorenzo. "You're bleeding. Oh God, you're bleeding." He smiled faintly, blood staining his lips, his hand brushing her cheek. "You didn't listen to me," he whispered, "but I'm glad you didn't." She broke down, holding him tight. Snow fell through the shattered roof, settling over their shoulders like feathers. Between them, roses and blood mingled into one color. "I killed someone," she choked. "No," he shook his head weakly. "You saved me." She looked into his eyes once full of darkness, now shining with something softer. "I understand now," she whispered. "Why you wanted me to stay. Because I knew one day you'd have to face this, my world." The wind quieted. Far away, flashing lights cut through the storm police, maybe, or something else. Their glow painted the snow crimson around them. Lorenzo leaned his head against her shoulder, his breath shallow. "Elena, don't leave again." She clung to him, trembling. "I can't, not after choosing to stay." Beyond them, dawn crept over the mountains. The first light touched a blood-stained rose, setting it ablaze with crimson fire. A silent vow written in the language of survival and love. And in that moment, Elena knew. There was no going back. Snow had fallen for 2 straight days, burying all of Aspen beneath a thick white shroud. The roads were closed, and news of the shootout spread quietly only to be silenced by the authorities. A gas explosion, the papers wrote. No one believed it, but no one dared to ask. Inside a warm room of a private mountain hospital, Lorenzo Whitmore lay still. His left arm was bandaged, his right shoulder stitched in a long, angry line. The cold from the snow hadn't fully left him. It lingered in his eyes, his breath, and the silent pauses between the steady beeps of the heart monitor. Elena sat beside him, her hand clasping his as if letting go might make him disappear. The doctor said he needed rest. She nodded, but her eyes never once left his face. Because in that moment when he had fallen in the snow, half buried in blood, she had seen it clearly. If he died, a part of her would never live again. On the 3rd night, he woke. The first word Lorenzo spoke was her name. "Elena?" She shot upright, tears already falling. "You're awake. You're in a hospital. You're safe now." He looked around, a faint smile on his lips. Safety? That's a fragile concept. "Don't say that. I once thought if I stopped fighting, the world would leave me alone. But it doesn't. The world is only quiet when we're silent forever." Elena tightened her grip on his hand. "No one wants you dead anymore, Lorenzo. We can leave all of this behind." He looked at her, his gaze resting on her hand placed gently over her stomach. "We," he repeated, voice soft as breath. "You mean you, me, and the baby?" She nodded without hesitation. "You saved me, Lorenzo, but I want to save you, too." He gave a quiet, bitter smile. "I've saved many people. Elena, they all died just because they stood too close to me." "You're wrong," she whispered, trembling. "You're not a monster, Lorenzo. You're just someone who's been lost in the dark for too long." He turned his head away, eyes half closed. "You don't know what I've done. If you did, you wouldn't say that." "Then tell me," she said softly. "Let me know who you really are." The hospital room fell into silence. Only the wind tapping against the window panes broke the stillness like the heartbeat of wandering souls outside in the snow. Lorenzo began to speak, his words slow and heavy, as though dragging each one out from deep inside his chest. 8 years ago, I worked for the Romano family. I cleaned up what they wanted erased. One of those was a pregnant woman, the wife of a traitor. My orders were to handle it quietly. Elena's breath caught. He paused, clutching the blanket in his fist. But when I found her, she was already down in the snow, blood everywhere like a river of red. I was too late. The baby didn't survive either. His voice broke. Since that night, I can't forget. Every time I close my eyes, I see the snow and the blood. Do you understand? Elena, when I found you there, I thought the past had come back, and this time, I had a chance to make it right. Elena said nothing. Her heartbeat pounded, sharp and raw. She placed her hand gently on his wounded shoulder, her touch as light as breath. You didn't save me to erase your guilt, she whispered. You did it because you couldn't bear to see anyone else die for someone else's sins. You are still a good man, Lorenzo, even if you don't believe it. He looked at her for a long time, and in his dark eyes, it seemed for the first time the snow began to melt. A week later, they left the hospital. The Whitmore estate was gone, half burned, half buried. The government sealed the area. Lucia vanished. Franco was buried in the small cemetery behind the old church. Elena stood amid the ruins, wind tugging at her hair, cold, dry, like memory itself. What will you do now? She asked quietly. Lorenzo's voice was calm, almost peaceful. Rebuild, but not an empire life. I still have clean money, a few legitimate contacts. I'll start over somewhere no one knows the name Whitmore. And me. He turned to her, his hand brushing her cheek. If you still want to stay, then wherever I go, that's where you belong. She didn't answer. She just rested her head against his shoulder. A month later, they settled in the outskirts of Chicago. A small white house by Lake Michigan, its windows looking out on the misted water. Each morning, Lorenzo rose early to make coffee. Elena sat in a wicker chair, knitting a small blanket, her belly softly rounded. No one mentioned the mafia, the snow, or the blood. They lived like two strangers learning how to love again. But at night, when she fell asleep, Lorenzo would sit alone on the porch, cigarette burning low between his fingers. The faint glow lit up the scar on his jaw, the mark of a past that never truly left. Elena knew, but she never spoke of it. She understood some people need silence to learn how to love, just as he needed darkness to see the light. One windy March afternoon, she stepped onto the porch and found him crouched by the car, fixing the engine. You don't have to do everything alone, she teased, smiling. He looked up, his expression softening. Old habit. I used to live in a world where if you didn't fix it yourself, it stayed broken. But you're not alone anymore. He froze. Then, for the first time, Lorenzo reached out, placing his hand over her stomach. She trembled under his touch. You know, Elena, he whispered, I never thought I'd get this chance to touch life instead of taking it. Her tears fell before she realized it. He brushed them away and pressed a kiss to her forehead, so gentle it ached. That night, with the wind howling off the lake, Lorenzo opened a drawer and took out an envelope. He placed it on the table. These are all the documents about me about Whitmore. If I ever don't come back, burn them. Elena stared, fear and pain colliding in her eyes. Why are you saying this? Because men like me don't get quiet endings. They'll come eventually. I just want you and the baby to live, even if it means forgetting me. You think I could? You've survived betrayal before, he said softly. You're stronger than you think. She didn't answer. She only took his hand and held it tight. And in that silence, she knew their love was like a small flame in a blizzard. It knew it would burn out, but it burned anyway, stubborn to the very end. That night, while she slept, Lorenzo stepped outside. The moonlight broke across the lake in silver shards. He inhaled deeply, cold air cutting through the scar on his skin. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. A message. No name. They know you're alive. He looked at the screen and smiled. The kind of smile worn by a man who's died many times but still refuses to bury his heart. Inside, Elena stirred in her sleep, whispering his name. He turned toward the window, watching her lying there beneath the golden lamplight, peaceful, unguarded. Sleep, Elena, he murmured. If I have to disappear again, I'll do it, as long as you live. Outside, the snow began to fall once more. But this time, within the endless white, Lorenzo saw no blood. Only light, small and real, flickering to life inside his chest. April. The Chicago sky hung like a sheet of gray glass, mirroring the soft ripples of Lake Michigan. Elena stood on the second-floor balcony, a cup of mint tea in hand, watching the first strands of sunlight filter weakly through the clouds. The baby in her belly was 7 months along now. Every gentle kick made her smile a small, private smile that seemed to brighten the morning itself. Inside, the piano played slow, uneven notes of Clair de Lune. Lorenzo's fingers still lacked their old precision. Each time he touched a key, he paused, as if learning to feel life again through music. She walked over and sat beside him. "You keep missing the third note." He raised an eyebrow without looking up. "My teacher seems to forget I'm not a pianist." "But you're trying to be normal." Lorenzo gave a quiet laugh, a hollow sound that faded quickly. "Normality is the most expensive thing I've ever wanted." Elena rested her head on his shoulder. "I think you've changed. Or maybe you just want to believe that." She said nothing. Outside, the wind tapped softly against the window, a small sound, yet enough to remind them that this spring was too quiet, too still. That afternoon, Lucia appeared. She didn't knock. She just stood at the porch, coat stained with road dust, eyes dark and sunken. Elena opened the door, startled. "Lucia, I thought you were in Italy." Lucia gave a weary smile. "My brother's good at hiding people, but he's not good at hiding debts." Lorenzo came out. The light in his eyes dimmed when he saw her. "You shouldn't be here." "I don't have a choice," Lucia said. "They're looking for you. Lorenzo, they know you're alive and they know she's with you." Elena's heart tightened. That meant her. Lucia turned to Elena, voice calm but cold. "You thought you could start over. Men like him don't get peace, not ever." That night, Elena heard them arguing in the study. Lucia's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. "Don't you get it? They won't stop." "She's just leverage, Lorenzo." "Don't call her that. She's making you weak, and you know what weakness means in your world." The door slammed. Moments later, Lucia's footsteps faded away. Lorenzo didn't come out. Elena waited until the light from under his door went out, then pushed it open softly. He was sitting in the dark, hands covering his face. "I heard," she whispered. He was silent for a moment before lifting his head. "Are you afraid?" "Yes." "Then why are you still here?" Elena stepped closer, her hand resting over his heart. "Because I don't believe your world is more frightening than one without you." Lorenzo gave a rough, broken laugh, part despair, part gratitude. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel his heartbeat hammering wild, uneven, terrified. The next morning, he was gone. On the kitchen table, only a note remained. "I'm meeting an old contact. Won't be long. Don't leave the house. L." Elena clenched the paper in her hands. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. 3 days passed. No calls, no messages. She tried reaching Lucia, but the line was static dead. On the 4th day, while walking near the lake, she ran into Camille, her old friend from Denver, whom she thought she'd lost contact with forever. Elena Camille froze. "My God, it's really you. I thought you disappeared." They sat at a small cafe, the city lights blurring outside the window. Camille leaned in, lowering her voice. "A man came asking about you. Spoke perfect Italian. Said he was a representative of Lorenzo Whitmore. Wore a gray suit." Elena's blood ran cold. "Did you tell him where I was?" Camille hesitated. "He said he just needed to deliver something. I didn't know." Elena stood up so fast her chair fell over. "Camille, you need to leave Chicago. Tonight." That evening, when she returned home, something was off. The front door was unlocked. The curtains fluttered in the wind. "Lorenzo," she called out. No answer. She stepped into the living room. Everything was as it had been, except for a single envelope on the table. No seal, no name. Inside was a photo grainy, taken from a distance. Lorenzo, sitting in a car beside a man she didn't recognize. Below it, scrawled in rough handwriting, "If you want him alive, bring the Whitmore files to Red Hook midnight." Her breath caught. Red Hook? The old port outside Chicago once used for the special shipments. Her whole body went cold. She knew it was a trap. But if she didn't go, Lorenzo would die. That night, rain fell in sheets. Elena drove his old car through the storm, wind slamming against the windows. the air thick with the scent of wet metal. Streetlights flickered. Darkness swallowed everything else. By the time she reached Red Hook, the abandoned docks glistened with puddles of oil and rain. She parked, opened the trunk, and lifted out the sealed folder the documents Lorenzo had once told her to burn. A figure stepped from the shadows tall, wearing a raincoat. "You came alone. Where is he?" "In there." Elena followed him into the warehouse. The air smelled of rust and gasoline. Lorenzo sat tied to a chair, blood on his lips. When he saw her, his eyes widened, terrified. "You shouldn't have come," he gasped. The man behind him smiled thinly. "Oh, but she did. Love always makes people foolish." Elena threw the folder onto the table. "Let him go." "You think paper buys life?" the man sneered. "No, I want the promise Whitmore broke." Lorenzo ground his teeth. "Langdon, it's over." Langdon's grin widened. "There's no end to betrayal, Lorenzo." He raised his gun. Elena screamed, stepping in front of Lorenzo. Langdon chuckled. "How touching. Love is beautiful, shame it never wins against blood debts." The gunshot split the air. Everything blurred. Light, sound, movement all dissolved into chaos. She saw only red, didn't know whose blood it was. A strong hand grabbed her, pulling her to the ground. Lorenzo's voice cut through the ringing in her ears. "Run, Elena." She crawled across the floor, palms slipping on the wet ground. Another gunshot thundered closer this time. When she looked back, Lorenzo was on his feet, gun in hand, firing despite the blood pouring from his shoulder. Langdon fell eyes wide in disbelief, as if he couldn't accept that he'd lost. Elena crawled to Lorenzo's side. He sank to the floor, leaning against a steel pillar, his white shirt soaked in red. "You're bleeding badly. I'll call for help." He caught her wrist, shaking his head. "No, don't call anyone. No one can know we're alive, understand?" "But..." "Listen to me." His voice was breaking, breath uneven. "From now on, trust no one, not even Lucia." Elena froze. "What?" "She's the one who told them where you were." Lightning tore across the sky. Elena stared at him, eyes wide. "No, that's impossible." "I don't blame you for trusting her," he whispered. "Lucia only wanted to save me. Her way was betraying you." The bleeding worsened. Elena pressed her hands to the wound, desperate. "Don't talk, please. You'll be fine." He touched her belly, where the baby moved faintly beneath her hands. "Don't let it grow up in darkness. Elena, promise me." "I promise, but you have to stay. You have to see our child." Lorenzo smiled faintly, eyes closing. "I already have. In you." Outside, rain poured harder, mixing with blood, with tears. In the flickering light of the warehouse, Elena held him close, her head on his chest, feeling his heartbeat faint, but still there. And in that darkest hour, she understood. To love a man like Lorenzo Whitmore was to accept that happiness sometimes arrives only after you've risked everything you once believed was safe. Summer arrived early on the East Coast, yet for Elena, it still felt like winter refused to end. 3 weeks had passed since that night at Red Hook. Lorenzo survived, but he was no longer the man he used to be. They hid in a small wooden cabin in the outskirts of Vermont, surrounded by forest and the steady rush of a stream that drowned out all other sounds. By day, Lorenzo rarely spoke. He sat on the porch, staring into the woods, his gaze fixed on something only he could see. The wound on his shoulder had closed, but inside him, something else still bled. Elena cooked breakfast, prepared his medicine, soothed the baby growing inside her, and lived quietly in their small, suspended world, one with no past and no promise of a future. One afternoon, a sudden forest rain drenched the porch roof. Lorenzo sat in his wooden chair, a half-burned cigarette between his fingers. He didn't smoke it, just watched the smoke curl away, as if he needed it to prove he still existed. Elena stepped outside and draped a sweater over his shoulders. "It's cold. You should come in." He smiled faintly. "I don't feel cold, just empty." "Empty?" "Yeah, when everything that made you who you were disappears, even the reason to fight." She sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his trembling one. "You still have me? And our child?" "You're the only thing that scares me." "Why?" "Because if I lose you, I don't know what I'll become again." Elena stayed silent. The rain grew heavier, wrapping his confession in a gray veil neither of them could pierce. That night, she found him in the middle of a nightmare. He jolted awake, drenched in sweat, eyes wild, unseeing. Lorenzo. He grabbed her shoulders, his panic so violent it hurt. Don't come closer. Don't. It's me, Lorenzo. It's Elena. He blinked, recognized her, and let go, his breath shaking. I'm sorry, he whispered, voice fractured. I thought. You dreamed of Red Hook again? He nodded and sank onto the bed's edge, hands covering his face. I saw myself shooting, saw Langdon laughing, saw Lucia standing behind him, and I couldn't stop it. Elena took his hand. It's over. No, he said softly. For men like me, nothing ever ends. It just waits for the right moment to come back. She didn't argue. She just stayed there beside him, letting him hold her hand desperately, as though it was the only thing keeping him from falling into the abyss of himself. The next morning, Lorenzo was gone. Elena woke to an empty bed, the door left open. On the table, a hastily written note. I'm going to see Lucia. I need to know why. If I don't return, don't look for me. L. The paper trembled in her hand, the ink still wet. She knew he meant every word, but she also knew that if he went alone, he might never return. So she took the car and drove south. Lucia lived in a seaside villa in Maine, where the sunlight glimmered on the blue water until it hurt to look. Elena arrived at dusk, the waves crashing against the rocks below. The door was already open. Lorenzo stood there, his clothes dusty, his face drawn. Lucia sat in an armchair, a glass of wine in hand, her expression calm, like someone who had been waiting for them. You're here, Lorenzo said quietly, his voice caught somewhere between relief and bitterness. I was going to ask, but I don't need to anymore. Lucia set the glass down. You already know. Elena looked between them, feeling like she was standing between two melting glaciers. Lucia, why? Lucia's answer was simple, unflinching. Because I didn't want my brother to die. And betrayal was the way to save him. You don't understand. Elena, my brother only knows how to fight. If he has nothing left to fight, he'll destroy himself. He needed a reason to live, and you are that reason. Elena shivered. You talk as if saving him means sacrificing someone else. Lucia met her gaze, exactly. Lorenzo's eyes darkened. You led them to her. Lucia, you nearly got her killed. But they didn't, because you're still Whitmore, the man who refuses to die. I just pushed you to the edge where you had to choose. He stared at her for a long time, then shook his head. That price was too high. Sometimes, Lucia said softly, only scars remind us we're alive. Don't you see? Before her, you were just existing. That night, Lorenzo drove Elena back to Vermont. He didn't speak the whole way. She watched him under the dim car light, his face set in stone, but his eyes collapsing inward, quietly, like a city sinking underwater. When they reached the cabin, he stepped out and stood before the trees. You can't forgive her, can you? She asked. I can't forgive myself, he said quietly, because no matter what, you're the one who pays. She walked up, placing her hand over his chest. I never thought of it as paying. I'm choosing? Choosing what? To stay? Lorenzo turned toward her, his eyes glinting like firelight. You don't understand. Elena, everyone I've ever loved has had to run from me. Then let me be the first who doesn't. Her words fell softly, but they rooted him where he stood. He pulled her close, pressing his lips to her forehead in a kiss that felt like both prayer and apology. 2 weeks later, the summer wind swept through the forest. Elena was hanging laundry when she heard a car engine outside. A man in a black suit stepped out, wearing dark glasses. Mrs. Whitmore. Yes. Mr. Lorenzo asked me to deliver this. He handed her an envelope, then left before she could speak. She opened it. Inside was a plane ticket to Florence and an old photograph of Lorenzo standing in an Italian square, younger, his eyes bright, untouched by shadow. On the back, written in his neat, slanted hand, I need to correct the mistakes of those before me. Don't look for me. When it's safe, I'll call L. Elena sat on the steps, the letter trembling in her hands. She knew this wasn't a goodbye. It was how he loved by leaving, so that she and their child could live without fear. She lifted her gaze to the deep violet sky. Inside her, pain and faith intertwined something nameless, something like hope. That night, Elena dreamed. She stood in a sunlit square in Florence, the light striking the old stones. In the crowd, Lorenzo turned, smiling the first real smile she had ever seen on him, unshadowed, unbroken. He reached for her hand and said gently, "See, even when we're apart, I still find my way back." She woke in the middle of the night, tears wetting her pillow. Outside, the moon hung high, silver light spilling across the forest and the stream. Elena placed a hand on her belly. The baby kicked softly, as if answering. She smiled through her tears, whispering, "Your father always walks toward danger. But maybe his love is the only light that knows the way back." Morning came. Elena sat alone on the porch, hair tousled by the wind, Lorenzo's letter resting on her lap. Beyond the forest, the mist lifted slowly, revealing a narrow road leading into the distance. She knew wherever he was, in Italy or lost among the ruins of the world that once claimed them. Lorenzo Whitmore was still fighting. Not to survive, but to find the road home. A month later, Florence burned with late summer light so golden it seemed as though every corner of the city was aflame in honeyed fire. Lorenzo walked through the crowd, tall, dressed simply in a white shirt, the faint scar on his hand catching the sun. He was no longer the boss, no longer the hunted man. Here, he was just another nameless soul with the dim, fragile light of someone who had seen too much darkness. He rented a small room above a cafe near Ponte Vecchio. Each morning, church bells woke him. Each night, violin music from the square drifted through the open window. And every time he opened his journal, he began with the same line, "Day Ang without Elena." Not because he had forgotten, but because he was afraid to count. Counting meant believing that time could pull them further apart, and that was something he refused to believe. Elena gave birth in mid-July, in their wooden cabin in Vermont among trees, quiet and soft yellow light. The child was born just after the summer rain stopped. She named him Luca, meaning light. A simple name, but one filled with prayer. That night, she watched the baby sleep, his tiny fingers curled around hers. In that moment, she understood why Lorenzo had chosen to leave, because if he had stayed, peace like this could never have existed. She wrote him a letter, not knowing if he was still in Florence or somewhere far beyond. "Lorenzo, our son is here. He has your eyes. If you ever read this, know that you're still here in every breath he takes, in every morning light through the window. I don't blame you for leaving. Sometimes love means walking away, so the other can live." She never sent the letter. She folded it and placed it inside the old music box he'd once given her, the one that played Claire de Lune when opened. In Florence, Lorenzo met an old acquaintance, Antonio Rossi, once the Romano family's lawyer. Antonio was old now, living in seclusion, working in a dusty library. When Lorenzo arrived, the man simply looked up and sighed. "Whitmore, you've aged. So have you. But you're alive, and that's already a miracle." Lorenzo sat down and opened an old file. "Romano's son still controls the European routes. He wants to reopen the trade lines. I need proof to stop it. Doing that will tell them you're still alive. They already know." Antonio looked at him, fear and pity flickering together in his eyes. "So what are you going to do?" "What my father never had the courage to." In the days that followed, Lorenzo slipped back into the shadows of his old world, a place where every meeting could be a trap, and every handshake might cost a life. He met men who once worked under him, men who now looked at him with suspicion instead of loyalty. But this time, he wasn't seeking power. He was seeking evidence documents, recordings, secret deals. He didn't want revenge. He wanted closure. At night, he sat by the desk in his rented room, lamplight flickering over his scar. Some nights, he still dreamed of red hook of gunfire, blood, Elena's voice calling his name. He would wake, switch on the light, and take out the small photo hidden in his wallet. Elena and him. From that quiet morning in Chicago, sunlight spilling through the window. The photo was worn, but her smile still made him feel alive. In September, Antonio was murdered. They found his body by the Arno River, a single scrap of paper in his pocket. "I know Whitmore." Lorenzo understood his time was running out. He gathered the evidence, sealed it, and sent it to an international journalist, along with a brief note. "If I disappear, let the world know who truly runs the blood of this city." That night, he left Florence. In Vermont, Elena sat on the porch, holding Luca. The baby slept soundly, lips pursed as if dreaming. Then, through the quiet forest, she heard the distant sound of an engine. Headlights swept through the trees, then faded. She rose, heart pounding, and stepped into the yard. A shadow emerged through the mist, tall, steady, familiar. "Lorenzo, Her voice broke. He stopped, his eyes hazy with exhaustion and rain, but unmistakably his. "I told you I wouldn't make you wait too long." She ran to him, falling into his arms. He held her so tightly she could hear his heart racing, not like a man still running, but like one who had finally come home. "I thought I'd never see you again," he said, voice rough. "I thought so too," she whispered, tears wetting his shoulder. "But maybe light always finds its way back." He smiled the smile she thought she'd lost forever. "It's over. Romano's been arrested. They can't touch us anymore. And Lucia. She's gone, maybe trying to atone." Elena nodded softly and placed Luca in his arms. "Our son?" Lorenzo looked down at the child, his expression melting into something unrecognizable gentleness. He touched the boy's cheek and murmured, "Luca, looks like you, but his eyes, they're mine." Elena smiled. "You once said you didn't believe you could create anything good." "I was wrong." He looked up at her, eyes deep and steady. "You and him, you're the only good things I've ever made." That night, as the wind moved across the porch, they sat together beneath the moonlight. The soft glow revealed every scar, every line on his face, each one a story now finally quiet. Elena rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the forest whisper around them. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Rebuild Whitmore not an empire, but a foundation, for those the world forgot. You'll make it work." "I'll try, but this time you'll be my reason, not my cost." Elena took his hand. "I was never the cost. Lorenzo, I'm the part of you that chose to live." They sat in silence. Sometimes no vows are needed, staying is enough. The next morning, Lorenzo carried Luca down to the lake. The water was clear, the sky pale blue. He lifted the boy into the air and laughed a sound light and unburdened, free for the first time. "Elena," he called, turning to where she stood on the porch. "I think I finally understand. Love doesn't save anyone, it just gives us the courage to go on." She nodded, eyes glistening, and we have. On the lake's surface, the reflection of the three of them shimmered. A man with a scar, a woman with a gentle smile, and a child reaching toward the sun. No one could say what the future would bring. But in that early autumn morning, surrounded by forest and water, every wound finally went quiet. When Lorenzo went back inside, he saw the old music box on the table. He opened it. Claire de Lune played softly, tender as a breath after a storm. He slipped a piece of paper inside and wrote one last line. "If one day our son asks who his father was, tell him his father once lost himself in darkness, but found the light when he learned to bow to love." Outside, sunlight streamed through the windows. Above, the clouds scattered, revealing the first true blue sky in months. Elena stood at the doorway, watching Lorenzo and Luca laughing together, their reflections shimmering across the lake. And in her heart, finally, she knew. After every storm, love can still bloom even in the soil once trampled by darkness. Spring returned to Chicago. Above the city, flocks of birds arced across the sky, gliding over Lake Michigan, where sunlight spilled like liquid gold. The city seemed reborn softer, slower, and somehow less cold beneath the morning light. A year had passed since that fateful night at Red Hook. The wounds had healed, but their traces remained gentle reminders that love never comes easily. Lorenzo sat in his new office, the walls washed in white light. No guns, no hidden safes. Only books, music sheets, and an old photograph of Maria Miller standing beside Elena Romano. The door opened. Elena entered, carrying a cup of tea. "You didn't sleep again." He smiled. "I'm afraid if I close my eyes, the world might change again." "The world only changes when you abandon it." "Maybe," he murmured, gazing out the window where dawn painted the horizon pink. "But sometimes I wonder if I hadn't walked into that bar that night. Would I have ever found the light?" Elena placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft. "You would have, because the light always finds those who turn toward it." That morning, they walked along the lakeshore. Luca ran ahead, his small shoes leaving prints in the damp sand. He laughed, picking up a pebble and holding it up. "Dad, this one looks like a heart." Lorenzo chuckled, crouching to lift him. "A heart, huh? Then keep it safe. Don't drop it." Elena watched them, the sunlight reflecting in her eyes warm as fire at the edge of spring. They stopped by the new community center, once the site of an abandoned warehouse. Now, the sign above the entrance read, Whitmore Foundation for Urban Renewal. Elena had designed it, Lorenzo had founded it. Inside were a public library, classrooms for orphans, and a support center for women rebuilding their lives. A small group of reporters waited in the lobby. Cameras flashed as the couple entered. A young journalist asked, Mr. Whitmore, you're known as a mysterious businessman even with a controversial past. Why choose this path? Lorenzo paused, then answered slowly, clearly. Because I've lived long enough in the dark to know if no one dares bring light, darkness wins. He turned to Elena, adding quietly, and because someone once believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. The opening ceremony began at sunset. Soft golden lights filled the hall. The crowd was large, yet hushed as though witnessing redemption written not in words, but in light itself. Elena walked on stage in a long white dress. She didn't read her prepared speech. Instead, she said simply, We built this place not to change the world, but to remind it that even those who once lost their way can find their way back. When she stepped down, Lorenzo took her hand. Amid the applause, they looked at each other saying nothing, because their eyes had already told the whole story. Later that night, they stood together on the rooftop. Below them, the city glowed windows shining like scattered stars. Elena leaned on the railing, the wind playing with her hair. I remember this city the night we first met. So do I. Back then, I thought you were dangerous. I was, he said with a quiet laugh, then glanced at her. And now, what do you think I am? She smiled. A man who's learned how to love without hiding. He said nothing for a while. In the shimmer of the city lights, his eyes held something unspoken, a softness that came only after breaking. Finally, he whispered, Elena, I once said love doesn't save anyone, but I was wrong. It doesn't save, it teaches us how to survive without losing who we are. She smiled through her tears. I know, because you taught me that. When the guests had all gone, Lorenzo walked alone through the quiet lobby. On the main wall, a bronze plaque reflected the dim light, dedicated to those who dared to find light in the dark. He touched the engraving, his heart suddenly light as if every weight he'd carried had been laid to rest there. No longer the Whitmore of the underworld. No longer a man of guilt. Just a man learning to live without fear. When he turned, Elena and Luca were standing by the door. Dad, Luca asked, is the dark afraid of the light? Lorenzo smiled and lifted him up. Yes, but sometimes even light is afraid of fading. So what do? We light it again even if it's just a spark. 1 year later. The garden behind their house bloomed with lavender. Elena sat on the porch, finishing the last page of her new manuscript, a book titled The House with No Doors. As she set down her pen, Lorenzo stepped out carrying 2 cups of coffee. Still writing about us. She laughed. No, about people like us. He sat beside her, eyes tracing the pale sky. Do you think they'll believe it? They don't have to, she said softly. They just have to feel it. He looked at her, then leaned in to kiss her forehead. Thank you for finding me when the whole world looked away. She smiled, her eyes shimmering in the sunset. You're wrong. I didn't find you. You found yourself and then you found me. The sun sank below the horizon, but the light didn't fade. It lingered on their skin, in their breath, in Luca's laughter as he ran through the garden. A chapter had closed, not with blood or tears, but with forgiveness. Forgiveness for others. And for themselves? If this story touched your heart, follow the channel and share your thoughts below. Every comment is a spark that helps future stories come alive and reach more hearts.